Dear Professor Rhett Diessner, thank you for joining me for this interview. You are Professor Emeritus of the Psychology Department in the Social Science Division of Lewis Clark State College. You started as one of Lawrence Kohlberg's last students, the Kohlberg that is famous for his 6 stages of moral reasoning. And you have since researched the personality traits of engagement with beauty, beauty in nature, beauty in art and design, and moral or inner beauty. In recent times, you have also researched the moral virtue of elevation, which was first studied by John Habe. As it stands, you might be the world's leading researcher on the trait of appreciation of beauty. uh, I challenge other people to find like a lot of resources on this topic. This is an informal experimental dialogue as usual, so we take the freedom to revise our views during the interview or after the interview. I think I will start with some more general questions, and then maybe we will gradually move into discussing specific psychological research themes or academic papers and so on. Um, but it doesn't matter, whichever way it goes. All right, so I feel like I could start just with simple questions about what is beauty and what is moral beauty, and like where is your research? In which area is your research? Do you cover both areas, or is it just the second one? And how should we understand what you're doing?
Well, what is beauty is a question that's fascinated philosophers for millennia, and there's no consensus answer on it. One of the America's best known philosophers of aesthetics, Crispin Sartwell, who wrote the section on philosophy of beauty for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, he said that not only can we not define beauty, but perhaps we should not try to define beauty. So I think that's something to keep in the back of our minds. We see the same problem with all three of the great transcendentals. So truth, beauty, and the good. These have all been great challenges to define. I mean, epistemologists have been trying to define what truth is, and so many philosophers of ethics have struggled to determine what morality is and the good. So it's a pretty open idea. That said, my favorite definition of beauty is unity and diversity. And there's a great tradition in Western philosophy of associating beauty with unity and diversity. So when we have an experience of beauty, when we're having that, aha, whoa, that's fantastic, look at that beauty, our conscious or unconscious minds are noticing that we have a form that is uniting many diverse elements. And you can find this type of definition in Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and Renaissance philosophers like Ficino, even up to fairly modern philosophers like John Dewey or Iris Murdoch. So again, well, it's probably undefinable, but I think that's a good key point, that there is something going on between beauty and unity and diversity. You're mute.
Sorry. How did psychology come to take interest in these themes? I guess there is an interest in beauty per se, and then there is an interest in moral beauty as well. So how it seems should I say, revolutionary? It seems a bit unexpected, considering where some of the disciplines were, I don't know, decades ago.
Well, kind of the foundational book on psychology and beauty was, I think, in the 1870s by the German Professor Fechner, who was one of the first ones to do any empirical studies about appreciation of beauty, wrote a book on it in German. Um, but then the interest in beauty dropped in the 20th century, and it dropped across both psychology and philosophy, and particularly art criticism. Around the turn of the century, say 1920s, the avant-garde artists thought beauty was bourgeois and opium of the masses and a waste of time. And so almost the whole 20th century, beauty was uncool. And let me think. The first book on psychology of beauty written in English was in 1905 by Ethel Puffer, a really brilliant woman who was an American, went to Germany to study aesthetics, psychology of aesthetics, had great difficulty with it. The Germans didn't want to let a woman into the University of Berlin, but then she found a mentor at the University of Freiburg and went and worked with him. And then later she came back to America. She finished everything she needed for a PhD at Harvard, but Harvard would not grant her the degree because she did not have testicles. It was kind of a sad story. But she is a real pioneer. But her book on psychology of beauty came out in 1905, and there really wasn't another good book in English on the psychology of beauty until the early 1960s. And then again, a dearth. No more books on the psychology of beauty until my 2019 book came out on appreciating the trait of appreciating beauty. But we've seen a great resurgence in the interest in beauty. American philosophers like Arthur Danto, writing in the 1990s, he wrote a book even called The Abuse of Beauty, where he points out that most of the 20th century artists spurned it. But he said it won't go away because beauty is not just fluff, it's a central issue of a flourishing life. So he was raising the flag in the 90s that beauty was coming back. And actually, I got interested in beauty about the time I met you. In the late 90s in Switzerland, I was walking around in those mountains and seeing the ancient architecture, some of those abandoned castles, and looking down at the Bodensee, at Lake Constance, and I thought, what should a psychologist study? And it dawned on me that beauty was mentioned over 1,000 times in the Baha'i writings. I thought, okay, there's something pretty important about beauty. Maybe I should dedicate my life to studying the psychology of that. So that's kind of how I got launched into it. And at the time, there were very few psychologists studying it. So the early 21st century, not very many papers coming out. But also, as you've mentioned, moral beauty. So the seminal paper on the psychology of moral beauty came out in the year 2000, as you mentioned, written by Jonathan Haidt. And since that time, there's been an explosion of research studies on moral beauty, and specifically the moral emotion that it arouses, which Haidt named elevation.
How how would a psychologist go about studying beauty? And,
Well,
and what would be beauty for them, as from their framing? How would that look?
what's beauty from a psychologist viewpoint?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, psychologists have mostly approached beauty in the same way that lay people would, which is this idea of beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So in that sense, it's along the long line of thought that beauty is subjective. There's no objective beauty out there. It's just what you, Philippe, find beautiful. Could be different what I find beautiful, and it's all good. That's just fine. So psychologists will do things like show a painting uh, to their participants and say, rate how beautiful this is. So it's a very much kind of subjective approach. Um, about that same time, the early 21st century, began the field of neuroaesthetics. And so there were just a few neuroscientist type psychologists who started using EEGs and MRIs to study what's going on in the brain when we're exposed to beauty. But they did the same type of thing. They would ask a person, they'd show a person an image or play a piece of music for them and say, how do you rate this on beauty? And if they rated it high, then they'd look what's going on in their brain when they're experiencing this painting they find beautiful, or when they're experiencing this piece of music they find beautiful. And that's been some pretty intriguing research.
Let,
And that's
let's
also been exploding since the
let,
early 2000s.
let's go into this a bit more. So you have functional magnetic resonance imaging. Uh, you have functional near infrared spectroscopy. I'm
Yeah,
trying to say those words. Anyways, the point is you have some methods to detect blood flow in the brain,
yeah,
and then you detect in which part of the brain the blood flow goes when you're watching, when you're having those experiences.
yeah,
And by doing that in so many ways, you start mapping which part of the brain corresponds to particular activities or
yeah,
and so forth. And then you also have the electroencephalogram, which I guess measures the electrical activity of the brain or brain waves.
yeah,
And that's a similar way of mapping, but you're mapping brain waves instead of mapping, well, you're mapping electrical activity rather than blood flow. And there are pros and cons for each of these ways of measuring. But out of that, I guess there's quite a number of interesting things coming out. And it's in line with a lot of other developments in, I guess, neuroscience, which is a big field widely. Um, I guess is one of the things that come out of this that the brain seems to process physical pleasures and intellectual pleasures in different locations. So is it like a divide between physical pleasure and intellectual pleasure in some sense?
yes. This is what we might call domain generality and domain specificity. So actually, intellectual pleasures and physical pleasures, that ice cream cone tastes good.
Mm.
Or, oh my gosh, did you look at that new formula by Einstein? It's so beautiful. So we see that there's going to be overlap, literally like the reward centers in the brain, the ACC, what's that? Something about the cingulate. They will light up for both kinds of pleasure,
Mm.
but we do tend to have more of the OFC, orbital frontal cortex, is going to light up for the intellectual pleasures and also for moral beauty.
Mm,
When we're experiencing moral beauty, we definitely get that area. In fact, over there in the UK was one of the great pioneer neuroaestheticians was Seymour Zeki
mm,
and Samir, I mean, and he claimed he wanted to make a case around 2010 that there is a universal processing center for all kinds of beauty.
mm,
And he located it in a particular part of the orbital frontal cortex. Maybe it was area A4. I could be wrong on that. And but he showed that area lit up for beautiful music, for beautiful paintings, even for beautiful mathematical equations. I remember when I mentioned this to Giulio Savi one time in Italy, the great poet and the great Baha'i philosopher, and he said, "I could never find a math formula beautiful." But of course, they didn't take lay people in. What they did was say to a mathematician, "Tell me an equation that you find beautiful," and then stick them in the
mm,
fMRI machine and
mm.
have them think about that formula. And sure enough, the same area that for beautiful paintings or beautiful music lit up. And yeah, that was kind of interesting.
So, so these measurements, they seem to capture our our reaction to beauty, but also kind of what we construct as beautiful at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, good summary.
Um, Thank you for that. I almost feel like asking silly questions at this point. Like, can such measurements tell you like really interesting and wild things, like if one is in love or not?
Well,
Because brainwaves, there's a lot of work on helmets and things that can monitor brave waves, and there's a lot of
yeah,
discussion of them being introduced at work, and there's a lot of discussion of like retaining all that data and applying AI to that data. And so I don't want to go in that direction, but one of the
yeah,
things I was curious about is like how much more can you tell from analyzing brainwaves?
yeah. Well, like a lot of things in science, we'll be looking back on this time and thinking, "Ooh, those were very crude measurements," right? They're just giving us little hints, the way I look at it right now. And I don't know, how do I like to say it? Uh, People believe in the brain.
Mm,
I don't know how else to say that. So when we show something from brain research, a lot of people think must be true. It's the brain. But even that, it's coming into question. Like we think the brain is the center of our individual consciousness, but there's a fair amount of philosophers and neurosurgeons now that are kind of questioning that, even saying, wait a minute, maybe consciousness is non-local and the brain's just tapping into this
mm,
universal consciousness. Um, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think that's kind of woo-woo stuff, and other times I think, well, maybe that's the way the universe is.
mm.
But at this point, they're just kind of cool ideas. We don't know.
How is so? I think I've read in passing that beauty is not the only aesthetic emotion. How does that work? There's other aesthetic emotions at play. I mean, I can imagine a
Yes.
negative one, but I was trying to think of a positive one that would differ, and I wasn't sure what they might
Yeah,
be thinking about.
yeah. Well, actually, there's this wonderful researcher in Germany, Ines Schindler, and she published a paper back in 2017 completely on aesthetic emotions, and she developed a scale, a Likert type scale that psychologists love. These little, read a sentence, check something 1 to 7, and again, something we'll look back on as a very crude approach to psychology, but at the same time, it gives you some ideas that can be meaningful. And she identified 22 clusters of aesthetic emotions. And I think the scale then has like 44 questions. Although one of the things you bring up is a concept that I've just started to write a little bit about, which I'm going to claim that beauty is not an emotion.
Mm,
And even in this scale that I'm mentioning right now, all through the paper, she talks about beauty being an emotion, but the actual question on her test is, I found it beautiful. Yeah, that's not an emotion. I found it beautiful.
mm,
And you can try it, just a simple linguistic thing, right? You can try it in several languages, Romanian, English, whatever. And you can say, I found it beautiful. But what about the sentence, I feel beauty? I feel beauty?
mm,
You can say, I feel awe, I feel disgust, I feel love, but nobody says, I feel beauty unless they're a poet, right? And if you see that in a line of poetry,
mm,
you'll, but we don't really process it as an emotion. But that said, it is one of the most powerful experiences for eliciting emotions.
mm,
And you asked me, like, what other kind of emotions are there, aesthetic emotions? Well, one of the most important ones is awe. And awe is a very common response to beauty, right? We see a fantastic
so
scenery,
so
mountain, river, and we feel awe. Oh. And we go into a museum or any art gallery, and all of a sudden this painting just grabs us and we feel awe, right? Or uh, we've listened to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony 50 times, but every time we're like, ah. So it's that's just an example of one of the most powerful aesthetic emotions that's highly associated with beauty. But speaking of awe, I want to connect that to what you asked me earlier about moral beauty. Most people, most psychologists, let's say, when they're writing about awe, they'll say, well, the most common experience of awe is natural beauty. Uh, it turns out that a lot of people don't think they're into art. That's for those folks. But almost everybody has some appreciation in natural beauty. And that's kind of been the standard thing in psychology research. The number one cause of awe is natural beauty. And this fantastic researcher at Berkeley, Dacher Keltner, and colleagues, including one from China, Professor Bai, they did this really cool study recently where they asked 100 people in 26 different countries, so an N of 2,600. They asked them, what's your most common experience of awe? And it turned out they were all expecting it to be natural beauty, but it wasn't. It was moral beauty. So now they have this worldwide sample of 2,600 people, most of whom, when you just ask, tell me an experience of awe that you've had, the first thing that will come out of their mouth is an example of moral beauty, something
mm.
about human virtue, somebody being courageous, somebody being really loving, somebody sacrificing for others. Uh, so I found that very interesting.
I think I like this line of discussion. So let's see if I can maybe suggest, could we connect the part where beauty is looked at from the angle of evolution and evolutionary psychology, which kind of is different from neuroaesthetics or whatever the term was before. But can we outline a little bit that um, as a third kind of, I guess, way of looking at things, and then start maybe you could tell us more about positive psychology and all that, and because that's the part where virtues, in my view, virtues come in. So like neuroaesthetics, I guess, looks at beauty in different ways. One of them might be as a emotional, as an emotion, which you disagree with, I think for good reasons, although I have no knowledge in this. um, uh, and I guess you could look at things relating to beauty from the virtue side. In which case, there's also the question: what is a virtue for positive psychologists? But then you also have beauty as in like part of the evolutionary discussion, the discussion of evolution. So I guess, three different angles, which I guess are part of the discussion at the same time.
Okay, well, uh, I'll start with what you mentioned, the evolutionary psychologist viewpoint of beauty. And because we are also talking about neuroaesthetics, uh, one of the greatest living neuroaestheticians is Anjan Chatterjee out of the University of Pennsylvania. Really cool guy. I just love his work. And he's done a lot of good things on cross-cultural psych, but also a lot of brain studies. And in his work, he says that neuroaesthetics is going to tell us the how question. How do we experience beauty? And evolutionary psych is going to answer the why question. Why do we value beauty? This is his idea. I'm okay with it as a working idea. And so we have uh, I like to think of evolutionary psychology as what I call armchair psychology. And when I was in my master's program, it was completely dominated by professors that were behaviorists. I mean, like born again behaviorists. They were like evangelical Christian behaviorists, and they made fun of all the other sects of psychology. And so, like the whole psychoanalytic movement, they would just go, "Oh, that's talk therapy," out the window, right? It's behaviorism. If you can't observe it and you can't see the behavior, you got BS. You got nothing. And so I was brainwashed. Every professor in my department bought into that, and it's powerful scientifically. Um, but eventually, you get to realize there's some really brilliant human beings, and to diss them as armchair psychology, right? They're sitting in their chair and they're thinking about humans and their minds and their behavior, and they can come up with some really amazing ideas. But I do like behaviorists because they give us testable hypotheses. So that background is how I feel about evolutionary psychologists. They're armchair psychologists, right? I mean, how are you going to do an experiment in evolutionary psychology? I mean, the evolutionary psychologists will say, well, we can do simulations on computers. Yeah, that's right. Simulations of what? How humans behaved 75,000 years ago? Yeah, okay, cool. um, but that said, the standard rap coming out of evolutionary psychology is that we uh, found the things that keep us alive and allow us to make babies, we found those things beautiful. So, why do we love lush greenery in nature? Well, that's a food source, buddy. If you don't have lush greenery, you're probably going to die because where's your food? You know, there's your fruits, there's your vegetables, there's where the animals are hiding if you're a meat eater. So, if you're not attracted to that, bye bye body. And why do we love waterfalls and rivers and lakes? Well, you don't stay hydrated, you don't stay alive, and you don't make babies. So the
Yeah,
genes being,
but for some people, the moon is beautiful.
yeah, well, there's some serious problems with evolutionary psych. But, you know, the way a psychologist would go with that, right, is that the moon reminds us of the light of the sun. And we're attracted to daylight because in daylight we can find our food and water.
Uh,
I'm just saying that's how it goes. And it's not illogical, right? Or the moon reminds us of a beautiful round lake. Oh, fish, water, kelp.
I don't want to open another line of discussion, but I think that there might be a way to look at that from a cultural dimension. because the idea of beauty to me relates to ideals of perfection, and ideals of perfection are hugely important in our civilization across different civilizations across centuries, especially when those civilizations center around literary texts of particular kind where beauty features in particular ways, and the idea of perfection, whether individual level or collectively, is very strong. That has an aesthetic quality. Even the language, the literary text has an aesthetic quality. There's beauty in the literary text. So there's a way culturally to maybe play this game of, well, it's useful in evolution because it had a role in our cultures, quite central. I don't know much about this. It's not my area, and it's not really what I want to talk about. But I'm just just wondering if they might not go in that direction as well at some point if they haven't already. Okay, let me just yeah, let's go then. I guess we're going then to positive psychology. Is that correct?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us and what is specific about the way they look at beauty and especially moral beauty? Because moral beauty is not quite the same as it is and it isn't. Part of the discussion here. I think it would be great if we could clarify a bit when is when do the two become distinct and in which situations they are the same and which situations we are talking about different concepts.
Well, positive psychology, when it started, did kind of a cool thing. Back in the late 90s, they gathered together a bunch of scholars, anthropologists, psychologists, social psychologists, uh, religious studies, theologians, and said, let's figure out what the whole world agrees on are central virtues of the good life.
Mm.
And so they read the holy books, the Quran, the Christian's Bible, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita. They looked at things like the International Boy Scout Oath, the International Girl Scout Oath, and uh, and then they look for, okay, what is it that all humanity agrees on? And they came up with a list of 6 virtues. Well, this is kind of a cool approach. I like this, right? And so there's 6 big virtues were things like wisdom, love, courage, temperance, transcendence, and one more. I think I only got 5 of the 6 there. And then they said, so these are the big sort of eternal virtues, but from them spring human character strengths. That's what they called them. Most people look at their character strengths and they think of those as virtues. I mean, like one of the big virtues they called courage, and then one of the character strengths that come from it they called bravery. Well, okay, for most of us those are synonyms, and bravery is a virtue. We'll look under their virtue of temperance, and they'll have something like humility as a character strength. But once again, all of us, our ordinary speech, we call humility a virtue. So for me, this difference between virtues and character strengths is not only kind of fuzzy, but huge overlap. But that said, they this is one of the most important things about the whole positive psychology movement, as you implied earlier, is this focus on human virtue. Uh, the biggest thread for positive psychology was how to make people happy. And it's been criticized a lot for that. It's been called happyology, and the world's burning and you want the middle class to be happy. Great, wonderful, nice goal. But the serious positive psychologists, and there's been a lot of their writings on this and research, point out that a lot of what people call happiness is more like temporary pleasure, and we have lots of evidence that does not cause anything like long-term happiness. But what does cause long-term happiness is employing your virtues in your life. So basically, service to others through virtues is what positive psychology is finding causes kind of a more lasting kind of happiness, or what we could call a deeper kind of happiness. Or they like to cite Aristotle's word eudaimonia, kind of a deeper, more rational, soul felt kind of uh, happiness. Um, and then they developed a really cool personality test called the VIA test, via values in action. Millions and millions of people have taken it now. It's a fairly reliable test. It's got a lot of predictive validity. There's been hundreds and hundreds, well, thousands of studies now published using that scale. And in that scale, they ask people to rate 24 character strengths about themselves. So the current test, they started out with a test of 240 questions, but everybody's attention span is getting less and less because of how Western culture and these days Eastern culture, right? We're all exposed to this kind of action. So the test started out with 240 questions. Now it's down to 96, and that gives 4 questions for each of the 24 character strengths, or we could think of them as virtues. And in that test, one of those character strengths is appreciation of beauty. Um, they also, for instance, have one character strength they call spirituality. Uh, and in fact, I've talked to some of the leaders in positive psych that actually run the VIA Institute, where you can go online to take the test, and pointed out, some people, for instance, members of the Baha'i faith, they're not going to really think spirituality is just one of 24 virtues. Spirituality is where the virtues all spring from. Uh, but still, as groundbreaking work, psychologists, boy, if they avoided the word beauty, did they ever avoid the word spirituality, right? I mean, can you imagine behaviorists talking about spirituality? So it's kind of cool that these positive psychologists kind of legitimized this idea that spirituality could be brought into psychology and is a legitimate concept. So that's another thing that endears me to the positive psych movement.
What do they mean by transcendence as a virtue? It's
Yeah,
sorry.
well, I love that question. Yes, transcendence, the most basic way, is getting up and out of yourself.
Mm,
And so it's like leaving the self behind. And it's the type of virtue that's emphasized in nearly every religion, right? Nearly every religion we can think of is urging us to quit being selfish. Selfish is the opposite of transcendent. Think of others, think of the world, be altruistic,
mm.
right? Altruistic, again, means doing something to help others without any goal or reward for yourself. By the way, at least 50% of all psychologists don't think that's possible. They don't believe in altruism. uh, they'll use the word, but they'll define it simply as a pro-social behavior,
Mm,
which benefits yourself.
mm.
And of course, it is a good like brain teaser thought experiment to think, what would it be like to actually really do something altruistic where I don't even have an unconscious motivation to say, oh, good, Rhett, you helped that person, right? So I think altruism is more as a moral goal than something that we enact, but certainly worth trying to do. And the positive psych research, as I say, showed that's the kind of thing that leads to long-term happiness.
Okay, so if we take that appreciation of beauty is a character trait or a character strength, which I think is what comes of the positive
Right. This is
psychology.
That's what they're calling them. Yeah,
your research then is on this trait, right?
exactly.
So you have done a lot of research on engagement with natural beauty, which is your terminology. Uh,
Yeah.
Sorry, engagement. Yeah, engagement with natural beauty, or what you call ENB.
ENB, good job on your.
So how have you done that, and like what kind of conclusions come out of that?
Well, one of my most favorite studies I've ever been involved in, I did with Ryan Niemiec, who is the research director at the VIA Institute. So
Mm,
he's the research overlord of using that measure. And he's a super cool guy, very spiritual, very nice, very strives to be altruistic. He recently became an ordained monk in the kind of Buddhism that Thich Nhat Hanh advocated.
mm,
He's a really cool guy. And we gave over 14,000 people the VIA test, so profiling their 24 strengths. And then we gave them two different kinds of measures of pro-environmental behavior. So one of them was the intention. It's like you're saying, I want to do this, I want to do this. It's your intention to do pro-environmental behavior. And then the other measure we gave them was pro-environmental behaviors that you're currently doing.
mm,
So it would be like, simple things like recycling, maybe limiting your consumption of meat, particularly beef. Uh, are you, careful when you're washing your clothes? Do you hang them to dry them? Anyway, these kind of simple things, but things that show that a person is committed to the environment and making a better world and fighting climate change. Those kind of things. And when we got done analyzing the data from these 14,000 people, of which only 49% were Americans, 51% were from 117 countries,
mm.
and hands down, appreciation of beauty was the most powerful predictor of whether people either intended to be pro-environmental or were actually enacting pro-environmental behaviors. Number one, it beat everything. It beat love. It beat hope. It beat honesty. It beat courage. I mean, all 24 of the character strengths, it came out hands down number one for predicting whether a person is going to be an environmentalist in their personal life.
That seems quite unusual to me.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
st-
Well, it was a surprise. It was a surprise to both of us. Not a complete surprise. I expected it to be influential, have a statistically significant relationship, but I wasn't expecting it to be the number one. And so that has implications for real life, right? If we can assist people to appreciate the beauty of our fantastic planet, the chance that we'll get a little more active about stopping climate change is a real possibility.
It does make sense if I consider what you said before when you mentioned another research, which seemed to conclude that appreciation of beauty relates to nature for a lot of people, to like appreciation of nature. So I mean, okay, that putting those two together, then it doesn't seem so strange. But it's definitely very interesting. I think that I want to ask, can we change these psychological traits? Can you increase your appreciation of beauty or moral beauty?
Well, uh, the short answer is yes. Um,
Okay.
there have not been a lot of direct studies on this.
Mm,
Um, and uh, I tried one time. I tried one time where I randomly assigned college students to a beauty intervention and a non-beauty intervention in nature. And literally once a week, I would take the students out into a park-like nature, sort of like the arboretum on not sort of like an arboretum on a college campus, and we would take turns pointing out what we found beautiful. And this was what I was hoping would increase the trait. And then with the control group, we just took a walk. Nobody mentioned beauty. We just whatever walk we're doing, and there was no change. It was very disappointing. But one of the things about traits, by definition, is a trait is stable, right? So, like classic traits that everybody know about is extroversion, introversion, right?
Mm.
Is a person kind of introverted or are they kind of extroverted? And traits, like I said, by definition, are stable. If you're an extrovert when you're 15 years old, very likely you're going to be an extrovert when you're 30. It's
Mm.
stable. And if you're an extrovert at school, you're very likely to be an extrovert at work, an extrovert at home. So they're kind of stable across situations. So trait change, it takes a lot of work,
Mm.
and consistent work. And so I like to use the example of learning to play the piano.
Mm.
If you'd like to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and make it sound good, you don't have to be in the symphony, but make it sound good. You're going to have to practice 3 times a week, every week for a couple years, right? And trait change is like that. We have lots of evidence that trait change can take place, but it's going to require a longitudinal study, which are the most expensive and difficult studies to do. Yeah,
Okay, let me throw a concrete, like make the discussion really concrete about everyday life, kind of. So say I meet someone, I find them very beautiful or beautiful without knowing them very well. Okay, so I just
yeah,
think they're very beautiful. Then I get to know them, and I find that they have a remarkable moral beauty. I like how they make
yeah,
decisions or
yeah,
how practical, how balanced they are, both practical
yeah,
and
yeah,
intellectual and so
yeah.
forth. Uh, I'm wondering how does that and how do these themes relate to love? So that's kind of one
Yeah.
question. And the other question is where does elevation come in? Um, how would I, how does it fit in the picture? Yeah.
Okay, love, elevation, beauty and attractiveness between people. Well, what a consistent finding in empirical psychology between beautiful bodies and moral beauty is that when we see a person with a beautiful face, we attribute moral attributes to them.
Mm.
It's called the beauty is good advantage. So people that look physically good, we actually will rate them as more moral without knowing them at all, right? And a person that whatever our standards are, we think is not very attractive, we're going to rate them actually lower on their moral abilities. But as you implied, once you get to know a person, that can all change. So, for instance, a person that you were initially attracted to because of their physical beauty, and now you find out they're a little bit lacking in the virtue department, you actually begin rating their physical beauty lower. And praise the Lord, vice versa, right? A person that might, let's say, we find them kind of plain, but now we got to know them and we see they're full of virtuous action, we actually start thinking of them as more physically beautiful. It's kind of, yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I say multiple empirical studies showing that. Love and beauty. We could have a whole interview just on that topic. We could start with Plato and Socrates, right? Socrates, the wisest guy in the world, maybe, sort of. And the Plato Symposium, I just love it. It's my favorite dialogue. And it's a big party. They got dancing boys and girls. They got drugs. They're partying all night long. And they're just talking on one topic. What's love? And of course, Socrates, who is very clear-headed, uh, he points out that there's stages of love. And the kind of the lowest level is physical attraction. Oh, what a babe. What a dude. Oh, look at that V-straight structure. Look at that hourglass structure, right? It happens. It's love, but it's the lowest level. And then Socrates just takes us up through the various levels of love. And the main point of the dialogue is that the object of all love is beauty. When you love, what is it that you're loving? You're loving beauty. So if you're falling in love with somebody's beautiful body, that's because it's beautiful. And if you're falling in love with potato chips, that's because they taste beautiful. And if you're falling in love with God, that's because God's the most beautiful being in the universe. Anyway, that's Socrates Plato's rap. And there is some evidence for that. There's a little bit of psychological evidence. I mean, if we give people paper and pencil tests of love and paper and pencil tests of appreciation of beauty, they are significantly correlated. So there's a little bit of empirical evidence, but also lots of philosophical evidence.
Sorry, it seems to me like you might end up talking more about love in the future in this line of research. I am very grateful for you doing this kind of research. I- yeah, in a sense, I wasn't sure that it would be possible. So it is really interesting for me also to look at it in a sort of from a wider angle and kind of ask, could we say, could we maybe say that positive psychology is an example of how the humanities have influenced research themes or topics in the social sciences, and that neuroaesthetics is an example of how natural sciences have influenced research topics in the social sciences, namely psychology. When I say social sciences, I mean psychology. Because if we could say that, then there is a sort of incipient blurring of lines between these domains. And like as this conversation shows, you were operating in, like, at times you are like in kind of natural sciences, then you're like in psychology, then you are in the humanities dimension. And it feels like this is not unique to you, but like people in positive psychology have that kind of background. And so they try to translate things back and forth between the domains. And that's kind of always an interesting epistemological shift in the kind of scheme of knowledge that we have. And I mean, one could throw the climate change discussion in there as well, because that kind of connects those domains as well. Um, do you feel like there is this overlap and there's an expansion or some kind of opening that wasn't there and is likely to take us much further?
Well, uh, academia has been whining about a lack of interdisciplinary unity for a long time, right? Is that academics are in their private little silos, speaking their private language to their fellow disciplinary colleagues, but still everybody notices this and they know this is a problem, right? Is that we need, how do we like to say it? Truth is one. And there's a lot of different ways of approaching truth and knowledge. Um, and uh, we like the uh, two-winged bird metaphor, right? If men and women aren't equal wings of the bird, it can't fly. If science and religion aren't equal wings of the bird, it can't fly. But it's the same with the humanities and sciences. These things need to cross-inform each other, or humanity is not going to flourish.
Mm. Right. Thank you. That's really good. Um, and I think it would be a good way to end if we go there. But I do have another question from your from. I saw this in your book, and it's not like a big theoretical question. I think you're recommending in your book the animated film Princess Mononoke. If by Miyazaki, I should say, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember like why you made like could you tell us what is it about this film?
Well,
I have seen it, so
yeah,
I really like it,
yeah,
so that's why I'm
yeah.
asking. It's not like being strange.
Okay. Well, my answer is not going to go where you expect. So, uh, I have a friend, a past student, now a colleague, who's Japanese from Japan.
Mhm.
And when I was writing my book, uh, because he's a very intelligent person, but also can bring across cultural perspective, right? I mean, I'm just this cold-hearted German American who thinks he's a world citizen, but hey, this is where I live, and I've been culturally brainwashed, like everybody is in their culture. I mean, but still, it's hard to see outside of it, even when you know you should. So he very kindly proofread every single one of my chapters. A lot of work, right? And he's reading in a second language, even though he's really an excellent student in English as well. And he loved that movie, and he wanted me to watch it because it was so beautiful. So mentioning it in my book is kind of a nod of appreciation to him.
I th
Uh,
mm.
yeah,
I think it does have a lot to do with moral beauty. Uh, so and anything from Miyazaki is
yeah,
very beautiful to start with,
yeah.
aesthetically
He's
pleasing and so
brilliant.
forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was a great call. So I really appreciated that. So that do you want to remind us about your book again? The name of it and um,
I think the name of it is
understanding
Understanding
the
the
beauty
Trait.
appreciation, the beauty,
Yeah,
understanding the beauty appreciation trait. Um,
yeah,
empirical
that's it.
empirical research on seeing beauty in all things. I want to mention the empirical part. So yeah, so for anybody that wants to find out more on the themes we discussed, that is one way to do it, to find that book.
I
uh,
appreciate that.
I feel tempted, but we'll see how it goes because I feel somewhat tempted to ask one more question. So the discussion of virtues as objective versus subjective reality. Um, when positive psychology even says the word virtue, you have the feeling that they presume there's something that they exist, that there is well, at least they exist as an object of study. So there's a lot of discussion. Is this a thing? Is virtue a thing? If I'm not a religious person, why is virtue something of any interest to me? Um, on the other hand, if you take beauty and love out of our lives and aesthetic appreciation, which is why everybody's kind of watching Netflix when they go home after work. Like, what will be the exciting thing about life? So there is kind of a strange dichotomy between how we appreciate things that are in our everyday life seem to be very important, whether they be objective or subjective, and like how little we seem to take an interest in accepting their worth as objects of study. Well, I guess my questions would be around, how how do psychologists who do take the notion of virtue as an important, significant one, how do they think of virtue in ways that are not necessarily religious? So how would somebody that is not religious operate with that as a concept?
Well, it's difficult to find a person who doesn't value some virtues. So just like mentioning the big six from positive psychology, wisdom, courage, love, it's difficult to find any person to sit down with and say, do you think wisdom's important? No. How about love? Nah. What about courage? No. It's difficult to find a person like that. I mean, you can maybe find a sociopath, but of course, if they're an intelligent sociopath, they'll, oh, yes, it's very important, even though they don't believe it. But if you find a stupid sociopath, they could be, no, that's worthless.
That's
But yeah, we have this intuition out of our soul or out of the way our brain is evolved that virtues are very important. And regardless of whether a person believes in anything non-physical or a religion or what, I mean, right? The so-called secular humanists. Secular humanists, they love virtues.
yeah, but in that case, virtue would be like a kind of historical, social-cultural historical construction with a lot of legitimacy and importance, I guess. But I
Yeah,
guess that would be the angle, which is a fine angle to take. I have no problem with that.
yeah.
Um, it, yeah, I find it amazing. I find amazing your field of study. Your research seems on the cutting edge and quite important and part of a movement that is kind of on the cutting edge. And what I like most about it is that it seems to talk about things that seem very important to my everyday life. You know, like I'm not necessarily very interested in knowing the research exactly and how it was done, and but just the fact that there is an interest in this area and there might be some general conclusions that I could access. And that might tell me something about my life, my personal life, my public life, I guess, all of it. And it just seems a lot more relevant than other types of research, which could be very, very relevant, but they don't immediately get applied to my life. If I read the results, I don't necessarily feel like, yeah, I know how to take this. So you would have to be very good to understand why the metaphor of the mind as a brain, sorry, of the mind as a computer reveals really special things about your everyday life. So there is an immediacy in your kind of research, and also it's relational between. So it it not only uncovers things about me, but uncovers things about me as a web of relationships, because all those virtues end up being ways of relating to
Yes.
reality, whether people, objects, nature, and so forth. So it puts you in this game of how how good, how fair, how careful, how correct am I in my relationships, and where and how do I give what do I give attention to, and maybe care. And I think those are the things that would make us happier altogether if if we can work on how we connect with each other, which I think takes us back to your theme of moral virtues, unity, and diversity. So, if basically, I think we can end here because it goes right to kind of one of your key topics. So whether you want to say more or this is it, I'm stopping with the questions.
Yeah, this is a good time for me to wind down, but I've really enjoyed interacting with you. And, you know, you're one of those person that I looked at as a young man and thought, wow, he's beautiful. He's a babe. And then when I got to learn about your virtues, it made me find you even more beautiful.
Yeah, okay. I agree to disagree. But um
Don't cut that out of the interview.
but what I can definitely say is this has been not only a very deep and interesting interview, especially for myself, but also I think it's going to be the most fun interview I would ever do. So yeah, thank you so much, and we're gonna stop here. Thank you.